I'm going to read a quote by LeBron in which he said in an interview today with Pat McAfee. So here goes. You trying to tell me Giannis wouldn't be able to play an NBA game in the 70s? Giannis would have 250 points in a game in the 70s, James said. 250. LeBron is claiming that Giannis would drop down 250 points in a game during the 70s. I do think he was being intentionally hyperbolic with those statements. There's no doubt in my mind. He was just kind of overhyping it way too much in that regard. Do I actually believe that he believes that Giannis could score 250 points in a game during the 70s? No, I think what he was implying was that Giannis would easily dominate the 70s without any resistance and trying to make the argument that today's players are so much more superior than the 70s era. And just, I think the ultimate argument he's trying to push is that his era is the best era compared to the previous eras, and that essentially he's the best player in his era. So that would make him the GOAT. I think he's trying to play 4D chess here, essentially. And I think a lot of people are taking the bait now in the sense where they're just like, either siding with him in this regard, or they're just saying Giannis wouldn't be a great player during the 70s and whatnot. Here's my take about this, honestly. Do I think Giannis would still be a great player during the 70s? Yes. But I have to be honest, the 70s are before my time. I was born during the 80s. I'm an 80s baby. I don't even remember much of the 80s, but I can remember all of the 90s, just all of it from a basketball standpoint. But I have studied the game as a student of the game. I had to say the 70s did have a lot of great players. You had Julius Erving playing in that era, just prime Julius. You had Elgin Baylor. You had Jerry West. You had Walt Frazier, I think that was his name, with the Knicks. You had Earl the Pearl Monroe. Just, you had a lot of great players. You had big men like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Just, I think Kareem can still make the argument today that he's the GOAT. So that showed you how amazing he was. You had Wilt Chamberlain playing at the end of his prime in the 70s, early 70s period. He was still a great player back then. You had Nate Thurmond back then, who was a strong big man, ridiculously built like a truck. You had Artis Gilmore, also known as the A-Train. He was a 7-foot guy who was like 300 some pounds of muscle. He was ridiculously strong back then, an all-star player. You had Bob Lanier. You had Alvin Hayes. You had Dave Cohen. So you had a lot of great big men back then. And then you had Bill Walton before he got his injuries, who was a great player. Giannis would have had to deal with all those guys back then. Would he have held his own against those guys? Yeah, I definitely would say that. But I don't think he would dominate the league any more differently than he does today. He would probably be the same type of player, getting somewhere between 25 to 30 points a game and 10, 12 rebounds. There's another guy I think I didn't mention, Moses Malone. Just, he was a super strong guy, built like an ox, dominate big man. He played in that era too. Giannis would be battling him. So he would have a lot of competition, I think, back then, and it wouldn't be as easy as LeBron's making it sound. He would still get his. He would still get his numbers, but I think he would have been as equally successful back in the 70s as he is now, basically with just one title, maybe at best, not multiple titles. I definitely don't think so, because that era really was the first era where you had a proliferation of 7-footers throughout the league. In the 60s, I don't think you had many. It was, I think, very few teams had 7-footers back then, but the 70s, that's the decade which changed it all, where a team having a 7-footer was common. Like every team had a 7-footer on their roster back then. So the league wasn't a bunch of midgets, which is why I think just the competition would have just been as hard on him as it is today, back then. And I think to some degree, Giannis might have had it worse in this regard. Not to say that they would have stopped him, but I think he could have gotten injured more often that decade. The 70s decade was more violent even than the 80s or 90s NBA. They had some serious fistfights where people got knocked out, got sent to the hospital, literally. Just, that's how bad it was. Like, I remember watching a documentary of this one guy named Kermit Washington, and he's a guy who knocked out Rudy T and was kicked out of the league for, I think, a year or so after just knocking out Rudy T. Rudy T needed emergency surgery to repair his face. So that era from a physicality perspective was brutal. Guys would not be scared to lay the wood on Giannis. Not to say that Giannis wouldn't be able to take the hits because he's built like a truck and he could definitely diss it out while taking it, but I think the hits would add up and he would get injured more often than he does now because how many guys are willing to give Giannis a hard foul every single NBA game? Not many. It's probably a once in a while deal. You see Giannis get fouled hard, but it doesn't happen often. So he doesn't have to deal with that injury risk, which would have been added had he played during the 70s. Also, during the 70s, they didn't have this stupid bullshit defensive 3-second rule, which the NBA implemented during the early 2000s. Prior to the defensive 3-second rule, you could stay in the paint as long as you wanted to. You could literally protect the rim and just be right there. So they would always be a guy waiting for Giannis at the rim. Not saying Giannis wouldn't be able to score because he's super athletic. He could still finish with his athletic ability around the guy, but it wouldn't be easy as people make it sound that Giannis will get just easy trips inside the paint without having to deal with some resistance, whether it comes to some hard physical fouls or someone just waiting for him in there. So I don't buy Giannis' career being any different than it is today versus if he played in the 70s. To me, his success probably is the same. Maybe he gets just one title at best and he puts up great numbers, but he doesn't really win anything, outside of that. That's just my opinion about it. So I just had to throw it out there.